Welcome to How to Run a Successful Workshop. My name's Therese Perez, and in the next 20 minutes, my main purpose is to empower you when it comes to running workshops. So I'm going to be taking you through the process, the 3 key stages of planning, facilitating, and following up. And really, this is about imparting my knowledge and experience. I have more than 10 years experience in running workshops, and I've run hundreds of them. And every time I learn something new, but now the process is pretty much set. It's all about then the participants and how I tweak it based on what I need. So I'm providing you with some hot tips as we go through this work, because they're the little bits that people come unstuck with. So why don't I impart that experience to you? I'm all about sharing, and I'm all about empowering you.
Let's see what we're going to cover today. So we're going to cover the 3 key stages of a workshop, and these are planning, facilitating, and following up. And each of these stages is equally important. You might think if you've got some workshop experience that planning, it doesn't really matter. It's pretty easy. You get a venue, you have to make sure that the PowerPoint projector's there. However, if you don't plan well, certainly your facilitation is actually going to suffer. And the same thing happens around follow-up. So you might facilitate the workshop extremely well, walk out of the room, think, okay, my job is done. However, if you don't follow up in a timely manner, then you'll actually find that any momentum that you've created starts to suffer. So we're going to cover off some key points in all 3 areas. We're going to also talk about what makes a great facilitator, and I'm all about the great, not just about the good. I think running a good workshop, all power to you, but when it comes to great workshops, what we're talking here is about excelling in each of the areas of planning, facilitating, and following up. And I'm also going to provide you with some input around who you are as a facilitator, because I think that's really key. And in fact, self-awareness is really where great facilitation is at. And then lastly, what I'll take you through are the support tools that I provided you with. So you would have received that in the email that you were sent. So there are 2 templates. One is the key stakeholder interview sheet, and the other is a workshop running sheet. And really both are important just to help give you a little bit of structure so that you can ask the right questions if you're running a workshop on behalf of a key stakeholder, but also that you think of all of the information that I've covered off today and different areas that you might come a little bit unstuck. Planning. Now, I love quotes, so I apologize if you don't, but this is a great one, and it was at top of mind the whole time when I was writing this content. If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail, by Benjamin Franklin. And Benjamin was spot on with this. Sometimes I think through all my experience that I can just wing a workshop. I'll just turn up on the day. I'm sure I'll be able to facilitate it. And I always come a bit unstuck and I don't do as well as I should. So certainly pay attention to planning. So let's go through what planning entails. Know what you want to achieve. Now, you might be running the workshop for yourself and have some objectives that you want to achieve, or you might be running the workshop on behalf of a key stakeholder. It's important to know what they would like. And I talk about this in a moment around objectives and output and how that relates. Know who your audience is. Who do you need in the room to achieve the objectives is really important. And oftentimes I have to coach my key stakeholder around that, because they may have a different idea as to who they think they need in the room to achieve the objectives. I might have a different opinion. So important that you think about your audience in relation to your objective. What content needs to be prepared? PowerPoint, Excel. What other media files do you need? What handouts are you going to have? Who's going to hand them out? So content is really important because it can initiate discussion, it can create a brainstorming environment, and you need to know what's going to turn up on the day. Roles and responsibilities. This is something that really you could have. I could run a whole workshop on this, a whole presentation on it. Roles and responsibilities are key in any environment, but especially in a workshop environment, because it's going to have your workshop run smoothly if everyone's clear on what they need to do. the venue and the logistics. Now, if you're lucky, you might have an office coordinator or someone who can assist you with this. But if not, it's really important to think about the venue and the logistics of the day to ensure that that all runs smoothly. Now, I've run workshops across continents, so it's been very important at that stage where I've had to think, okay, what country do I actually need to run this workshop in so that it seems fair and equitable? So sometimes the venue might be ignored a little bit, just about capacity. Okay, as long as we've got a room with the right capacity, that'll do. However, your venue can actually give a really good flavour and starting point for your workshop if you have the right room, if you have chosen the right venue, and there's a big difference if you've got the venue off-site and on-site. So give all of those things consideration when you're thinking about the venue. What do you want to achieve? Okay, so I look in this in terms of objectives, but also output. Now, when I talk about objectives, this is something that sometimes my key stakeholder may struggle a little bit to articulate. So I will ask them, is there an output? What do you want me to walk away with? And then they can actually tell me that a lot more easily. So I then coin that insofar as objectives for my audience. But you need to know what you want to achieve. Start with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey would say. Now, I would say never to have more than 3 objectives for a workshop, even if it's an all-day workshop, because any more than 3, it becomes difficult to achieve. When it comes to output, think about what you're actually going to document and how you're going to document that as well. Now, I've had a workshop where I've run it where I've needed an actual template completed, and I've taken the headings in that template and workshopped the primary headings so that people can have discussion about it. I can capture their thoughts, and at times I table some information of my own so that people can actually provide me with feedback. So that's where the output dimension can also help when it comes down to what you want to achieve. But when we're talking objectives and output, these really do impact the following aspects of a workshop. The time, dependent upon what you've got as your objectives, is going to determine how much time you need. And sometimes I've had to suggest to a stakeholder that the workshop should be actually broken up into an hour workshop one week and then another fortnight let's regroup so that we've got time to go away, do some work and then come back to the same forum. So that is how objectives and time relate when you're looking at participants as well. So if you have a key stakeholder who is a general manager, which I've had before, then obviously they're going to impact the time because their calendar is very hard to get into. And when it comes to participants, they're going to be very directive around who should be there to actually achieve the objectives. I can provide feedback and input, but sometimes the participants, all I need to do is make sure that they're suitable and that they can give me what I want to achieve the objectives. The approach that you take. Now, these all start interrelating because the number of participants that you have there determines the approach you want to take. Now, if you have an objective that is all about looking at a process map and making sure that process map is suitable for the business, then you need to think about what are the dimensions of this business. I have a regional distribution area. I have a metropolitan distribution area. People have told me that the degree and dimensions of those businesses is different. So the approach I need to take is I need to potentially do a virtual classroom or a virtual webinar so that I can encompass both the regional view as well as the metro. So see how all of those actually start to relate. And that is all driven by the objective that you have. The invite content. Now, I put this in here because I believe the invite content is so critical to clearly articulate what it is that you're looking to achieve. It's the first experience that attendees have of your workshop when you send the invite out on email. So when they're looking at the invite, you want it to clearly express why they need to attend, and it's really, really critical. So please treat the invite content as a really critical component of your workshop. Know your audience. Now, I have a lot of marketing background. It's actually what I started out in, even though I've ended up in a world of projects and training. But when I look at the Know Your Audience, it is all about your positioning, and it helps you run the workshop. So you have to know, where are they from? Are they from regional? Are they from metro? Are they in your office? Are they out of office? Are they traveling to your venue? What's their background? How long have they actually worked for the organisation? What department do they work for? And why are they coming to your workshop? What are their roles? This is really critical when you're actually looking at introducing everyone around the table. It's important to know what their role is, and it's important that you actually keep the perspective of their feedback in relation to their role. Someone who is a little bit more critical as to a process may be because they're not familiar with it. You may have someone in the room who actually does the process. They're the people that you really want to be given voice around feedback on the new process, for example. So that's what we're really talking about with roles, and also know whether it's suitable to have a manager and their team in a room at the same time, because sometimes that can actually cloud people's ability to provide feedback. Why are they there? This is a great one. I have had many people turn up to workshops where they've said, I'm here because my manager told me to come. I didn't get any of the pre-read information, so I just thought I'd turn up. Now, that's okay, because that's reality. And as a facilitator, you've got to take that in your stride. It's just one of the experiences that you are certain to have when you're running workshops. Some people's motivation is different to others, so you will get a feel for it in the actual workshop itself, but you also need to know the intention as to why you invited them in the first place. How many people are attending? Important. Have the invite list there so that you know how many people you're expecting. That is going to impact your whole approach. So if you initially invited 15 people, only 8 are coming, you can take a different approach to if you had full 15 people there. You could actually hold the workshop around a boardroom table if you had a smaller audience. So it's important to know how many people are actually coming.
So it's really important not just to have a look at your participants when it comes to roles and responsibilities in their day-to-day work. It's important to understand who they are and the history for each of the departments if you're going to run a workshop where it might be cross-departmental. Also to understand the points of tension that might be in existence between different departments, because that could be a situation that you're walking into. It helps to get a heads up, but when it comes to the actual facilitation, what we're talking about here is actually being really present. So find out the information as much as possible, but don't assume anything when you walk into that room.
Okay, content. I am a big fan of PowerPoint. So presentation versus flip chart. You can have both. I really encourage that. I use PowerPoint presentations to help me articulate concepts, to do the introduction, to allow people to have a visual cue as to where we're up to in the workshop itself. I know that there are some organisations that are very anti-PowerPoint because it's death by PowerPoint. I just believe that maybe the medium hasn't been used very well. So, big fan of PowerPoint, and I always have flip charts up because that's how I capture information. Background information such as data and clips and research, certainly distribute them beforehand and well beforehand so that people have enough time to read them. But don't assume that your attendees have, and this is another reality check, I guess. It's just people are time poor. They're very just in time when it comes to attending meetings and workshops nowadays. So people will turn up and not be really informed, but probably bring the printouts with them, which is fine. As a facilitator, you just need to do some coaching around what the information is. If you've got a subject matter expert who has actually sent out the information, get them to do a summary, brief overview, so that people can get up to speed fairly quick. Other information or media, if there's clips or anything else that you wanted to bring, the most important thing is to know what logistical support do I need to help in being able to play that media. Oftentimes we go into workshops and see that someone's fumbling around with cables, people have got USBs, so it does kind of help to actually get content sent to you before the actual workshop. And here's another key tip, is that always give your presenters a week before the actual workshop to give you the information, because they will inevitably be late in providing it to you. So be sure to give them an earlier deadline so that you're not stuck as a facilitator. Roles and responsibilities. Love roles and responsibilities. If you are co-facilitating, there always needs to be a lead facilitator. If you're the facilitator who has more experience, then I suggest that it's you. If you have a subject matter expert who is going to help present information, make them aware that they're not facilitating, that you will facilitate it and that they can present the information. This is where roles and responsibilities is really key. In a virtual environment, which is where I've been presenting more often than not lately, it is also important to do a bit of a dry run beforehand so that people know who's presenting what and when. It's really, really key. Assigning roles and responsibilities is important. Scribing who's going to write down the information that's said. I use a dictaphone in my workshops. People have used iPhones to actually audio record, and I encourage that. The first thing I do though is I ask everyone if they're okay if I record the session, just so I have everyone's permission. And really it's so that I can re-listen to it and make sure I captured everything to do with the workshop. So you may have someone scribe, or you may just rely on a dictaphone. Presenting, who's going to present certain aspects or certain parts of the workshop itself. You definitely need a timekeeper. As a facilitator, I find it extremely difficult to keep time as well as be present. So important that you actually nominate someone to do that, and you can nominate a participant to do that. And the facilitation of breakout sessions. You can nominate people to do that, brief them beforehand. If you're not familiar with what a breakout session is, it's if you've got a big group, you break big group into smaller groups and you do an activity and then you regroup to give feedback and input.
This is a great tip. It's really, really important that you do a walkthrough or that you hold a meeting before you actually hold your workshop, especially if you're in a virtual environment and there's multi-presenters. And the reason being is that people get confused during the actual workshop itself as to what their role is if it hasn't clearly been spelled out. It's something that I know that if I'm doing a workshop and with the years of experience that I've got, I'm really comfortable to go on the fly a bit and get a little bit creative, but others aren't as comfortable, and it's important that you recognise this going forward. So you book in a half-hour meeting or an hour-long walkthrough of the workshop presentation so that people understand their roles and responsibilities. It's key and it will lift the quality of your workshop.
Venue and logistics. Let's have a look at this. Where do you want to hold it? I have always thought that if I have a project that is a bit more high profile, then I like to use a venue if I've got conference facilities within the business and organisation itself. I like to use the premium ones because when people come along and they're going to the executive boardroom for the workshop, there's an air of excitement and importance around that. So think about your venue in relation to your workshop and what's important. If you are running a team building session, for example, you may want to do that off-site because you don't want to have it in the confines of the organisation where people will just be thinking, work, I want to go back to my desk. It's important to actually go out and do the workshop externally. What facilities do you need? So projector, laptop, pens, whiteboard, flip charts, post-it notes, also important. But the thing to mention about facilities that you need, there's nothing worse than assuming that there's a projector in the room, getting there and realizing there isn't one. We do a lot of assuming when it comes to the venue and logistics, so it is really, really key that you don't assume anything. And if you're actually booking a venue that is external, it's even more critical that you ask the question as to what they have on site. How many people are attending, and do you need catering? Every organisation has different rules about this. Certainly government versus private have different rules around this. How long the workshop's going for is going to determine what catering you may need. And I know that it's really important to have snacks and things, and both you can have healthy and unhealthy in a workshop to help your participants pay attention and keep their blood sugar levels up. So is it a virtual or an in-person workshop, and do you need teleconference facilities? I've mentioned before that if you walk into a room and there's not a phone sitting in there, you've assumed that there's a phone in every meeting room, then that's going to be a trap for new players. When it comes to the virtual environment, it's also important that people across the organisation have all of the facilities they need to actually dial in, whether it be headsets, etc. And it is different if you're in a virtual environment or an in-person environment, because the length of the workshop, it's harder in a virtual environment to keep people participating over an extended period of time. Inevitably, people get distracted with their phones, their emails, and their day-to-day work, and can easily tune out. So remember that when it comes to the virtual environment. And how will you set up the room? This is really key. Often I really encourage people to go and have a look at the venue or the room beforehand so that the room itself can be set up appropriately. And always try and get access to the room half an hour before your actual workshop so that you can set it up and that you're nice and familiar with everything before it kicks off.
Okay, before we head into the world of facilitating the workshop, I just wanted to highlight to you the difference between facilitating and presenting. Presenting is very much a one-way communication where you're imparting information, you're informing people. Sure, you might have a Q&A at the end, question and answer, where the feedback flow might change a little bit, but majority of the time it is you 80% presenting, 20% responding. Certainly facilitation, entirely different. You want most, if not all, of the airtime to be from your participants. They're there to provide you with information. They're there to collaborate with each other. And as a facilitator, you need to be as objective as possible. I see that this is how it doesn't work sometimes. I've sat in workshops where people have presented information, haven't even bothered to ask questions as they're presenting, won't take questions until the end. And I think, is this a presentation or is this actually a workshop? So a workshop's about building something. A presentation obviously is imparting. So there's the difference. Certainly your presenter skills help you as a facilitator, but facilitation skills are paramount around being objective, being present, and it's all about your audience and not about you.
Let's go through facilitating the workshop. Setting the scene in introductions is really key. I have been in workshops where for the first 5 minutes, the facilitator is now starting to get into an activity and no context has been given. Now you may have the key stakeholder, if you're running a workshop on behalf of someone, come in and present to the group and tell them why it's important and why they're looking to get their feedback and input. And that is quite powerful. Now, if the key stakeholder can't attend, you may put up some words on a screen and just talk to it and to give some context, but it is important to pre-frame the workshop. Introductions are also key, going around the room, having people introduce themselves and what role they have. If it's a really big group, sometimes facilitators are reluctant to do that, but I think it's extremely powerful so that everyone has a voice and it actually starts to warm the room up because it actually starts the conversation. When it comes to introductions as well, I like to throw in something a little bit different, just as a bit of an icebreaker, which might be, give me your name, your role, and your favourite colour. As simple as that, just so that people have a bit of fun and can see that this isn't going to just be a standard workshop. So state the ground rules of the session. And this is really important because I am a big fan of clarity. And clarity is all about making clear how you're going to run the session. And that's all that ground rules do. It means that your participants know how you're going to facilitate the session, and they've actually given permission to you to do it that way. Now, when I talk about ground rules, I don't mean a long list of this is what you must do. It's simple things such as one conversation at a time, so that people aren't talking over each other. And it's definitely framed in the way that everyone adds value in this workshop environment, so we want to hear your input. And if more than one person is talking, then we can't achieve that. Also, that everyone in the room is equal, that there's no right or wrong, that anyone should express their opinion. Don't walk out of the room and not have expressed your concerns or your thoughts about a process that we're going to be covering off. And the reason why I articulate that to people is that you don't want people to walk out of the room and potentially be negative about things because they haven't raised it in the workshop and had their concerns addressed. So it is really, really important. Now, as a facilitator, being present is so key, so key. And when I talk about being present, if you're not familiar with that term, it's about being aware of what people are saying, intently listening and receiving the information, and working the energy around the room. Being aware that someone might be sitting in the corner and not have said anything when you really want them to be involved. So being present allows you to do that. And my biggest tip around being present is that if you're running a workshop for an extended period of time, you need to feed your physical body. So I always have almonds or something that's quite protein based so that I can have a quick munch on those if someone's talking, so that my blood sugar levels don't drop too far. And facilitators oftentimes forget this because even during a break, they might be talking to people and not really eat or have anything to drink. It's a big no-no. You need to take care of yourself physically so that you can be present to your participants. Being objective, this is really key, especially if you're running a workshop about your project and you're getting feedback and input about things. If you're not objective, the first thing you're going to do is start as a facilitator knocking back people's suggestions because you're saying, no, that's not going to work because of X, Y, Z. Or, no, I've had that happen before and that doesn't work. Now, as a facilitator, your role, remember, is to make things easy, and it's for people to be able to express what they would like in your workshop. So you need to be as objective as possible and capture information. Capture it even though you think, well, maybe they may not work, but we'll go away and we'll test it and we'll come back. So being objective is critical. And I have been in workshops where the facilitators become wound up by a conversation or taken on board some feedback personally. And I really find that it impacts the whole workshop, the whole feel, the whole vibe of it. And people just actually stop offering up information because the facilitator isn't being present and is being too subjective about things.
One of the biggest challenges you're going to face as a facilitator is not just the setting of the ground rules, but certainly the reinforcement of them. And one of the biggest ones that I find is the one conversation at a time, and especially when it comes to having senior managers in a room and their people and their team. So for some reason, senior managers often think that they're exempt because of their status. But remember, at the beginning of the workshop, I've set the ground rules that everyone is equal in the room. So I need to treat everyone with respect, and I need to treat everyone equally. So if you find a senior manager breaking one of your ground rules, you have to call them on it. And the reason being is that because they're challenging your role as a facilitator, and your workshop can get out of hand because people go, well, how come one rule applies to me and another applies to them? You've just tried to create an equal environment and yet you've broken your own rule. So have some confidence as a facilitator. You've asked for their permission. You've asked when you've set the ground rules whether they're okay with it. And that's really important as well. You can add on ground rules that everyone else wants on there as well. Oftentimes people will say having fun is one of their ground rules, but you need to be consistent. That's your role as a facilitator. So it's important that you take that space.
Let's go through some more around facilitating the workshop. So parking conversations, and this is a real skill. So if you haven't heard of the concept of a parking bay, it's actually one of the first flip charts I always put up. And that's really to help me to essentially park conversations which are going off topic. So I will capture them on a post-it note and I'll place it up in the parking bay and mention to the person who's actually had that conversation, I'll capture it and we'll come back to it, but it seems like it may not be relevant to this forum, so we'll come back to it at the end. And everyone's always happy to do that. Stay on task and on time. Time is such a key resource in a business, and if you're running overtime consistently in your workshops, people will stop attending because they're going to know that they need more time than you're asking for. So especially if it's an hour-long workshop and there are other meetings that are happening after that workshop, you need to finish on time. And that's the importance of actually having a timekeeper assigned. Be flexible. So I guess this is a bit of the paradox, is that you need to stay on time, yet you also need to be flexible if your workshop is going into territory that you hadn't anticipated in your agenda, but that you realize needs to go there. And that is where a really good facilitator can sense that I need this conversation to continue on because this seems really quite key. It's surprising. We weren't expecting this to happen, but we should be flexible enough to adapt and to allow the conversation to happen. And this is where being present is really key. Managing the energy transfer. Now, this is another, concept that may be new to you, but energy is transferred in a workshop through conversation, through activities, through collaboration, and oftentimes through creativity. So as a facilitator, your role is to manage the energy transfer. If you've got a pocket of people who seem to be shutting down, not offering up information, you manage that by asking them questions and involving them. If you have someone who's quite dominant in the conversation, you can actually park their ideas and ask questions of other people to see, have you found that has happened as well, Thomas? So Edith, have you found that you've had this same situation arise? That initiates the energy flow through to previously some participants who may be a little bit reluctant to share, and that is your role as a facilitator. Capturing actions is really key, and I have to tell you this really important rule of workshops: you can't assign an action to someone who isn't in the room. It is really, really pivotal. You take the actions, you place them up, you allocate it to someone if it's related to another department or another area. What you're actually saying is, okay, Tom, are you happy to take this action to Ed's department to follow up in relation to that process? But the action's on you. It's not on Ed's department. And that is really, really key, because I have seen it before where there's been actions captured for other areas and I'm thinking, this is just insanity. The people aren't here. And if they're not there, maybe we've got the audience wrong. So always important. Top and tail the session on your agenda and your running sheet. When you're actually putting in the timings on everything, it is really important that regardless of where you're up to in the body of your workshop, that you leave enough time for you to review the actions, to revisit objectives, and to close down the session. Really, really key. That is the one timing area that really you can't shift. The topping's pretty easy when it comes to top and tail, because the top is the introduction, the setting the scene, but often the tail gets left off and your participants can walk out of there feeling a little bit, I needed a bit more closure than that, Therese. So important that you actually do that.
So it can be really challenging as a facilitator if someone's taking the conversation off into the wild blue yonder. And I found that the easiest way to park a conversation is, first of all, have the flip chart up on the wall parking bay, explain its use, talk about it, say, look, if we find that we capture other issues that aren't related, particularly to the outcome we want to achieve today, we'll place it in the parking bay. And as the person's talking, just gently interject, certainly don't cut them off. I found in some workshops where the facilitators just cut the person off. It's very rude. I understand why they've done it, but they haven't done it in a very productive way, and it really hampers the general feel of the workshop for the participants. So, and certainly asking and just posing the question to the person who's raising the issue. So, is there some relevance between what you're raising and what we're here to do today? Because I'm more than happy to capture it, or that sounds a little bit like a current issue, and allow them to come to that conclusion. Capture the information, certainly put it in the parking bay so it's acknowledged, and you can move on.
Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this program that I'm all about the great. So, of course, I'm going to love this quote by Jim Collins, that good is the enemy to great. We really want to focus on those areas where you get biggest bang for buck. Now, and follow up, this is the stage in which you can maintain and even increase the momentum that you've created from facilitating the workshop itself. So what's involved in the follow-up? Document and send the output in a timely manner. And this is really key, and it's amazing how many people don't do this. Within 24 to 48 hours, you need to get the output delivered into people's inboxes. And why? Because they've gone back to their desk, they've gone back to their day job, they're now focused on other things, even though in the back of their mind they've just attended a great workshop, they have other priorities. If you leave it longer than 24 to 48 hours to have the output in their inbox, they're going to have other things than just take over. And it'll be too easy for them not to follow up if they have any action items that are actually allocated to them. The other thing to mention with the follow-up is that thank you goes a long way, and I mean a genuine sense of gratitude. Nowadays, people aren't actually made to go to workshops, they're actually choosing to, because easily they could delegate it to someone else. So the fact that especially client service staff have actually attended your workshop, I think it's worth showing a bit of gratitude for that. I know I value my time, so therefore I respect and value other people's time, and it doesn't hurt to actually acknowledge that, because then the next time that you're asking someone to come and attend a workshop, they'll know that you're actually grateful for their attendance, and they're more than likely going to put their hand up to go again. Now, I love this point about asking for feedback from your stakeholders and your participants. After the workshop's actually held, I will grab my key stakeholder aside or my subject matter expert, and I'll just ask them anecdotally, how did you feel that went? Just so I can get some initial feedback and see if it actually matches mine, because I'm a pretty hard taskmaster on myself. So I'll probably think there's some areas that I could have improved on where my subject matter expert will be, oh no, that was all fine. But it never stops me from asking for the feedback. And then, of course, with your participants, there'll be a feedback form that they'll need to actually complete, just so I can get their feedback as well. Or I might actually contact a couple of participants just to double check that they were happy with how things went, or just to see that they felt like that their voice was heard, and follow up with them if they had any concerns.
So what if you achieved your key stakeholder objective, but all of your participants felt like that they weren't heard in the session? Feedback's really critical, so I really encourage you to have a survey of some sort at the end of the session just to get some feedback for you as a facilitator, and also to find out what your key stakeholder thought if they were in the room, or what they think of the output.
Let's have a look at the tools that I provided you with. The key stakeholder interview template, that's for you to work with your key stakeholder on. It's really a thought provoker, so it covers off the venue, the objectives, who you'd like to participate in the workshop, just so that it can be a conversation point. It doesn't need to be kind of worked through if that's not the style that you really have. If you'd rather hold a meeting, ask the different questions and complete it afterwards, then that's just as good. But it's really just focusing on those hot spots that I've taken you through in the program today, so that nothing really gets missed. Now, if you're looking at the workshop run sheet template, this is for use on the day. You do complete it beforehand, but what it's doing on the day, especially if you're co-facilitating, it just helps everyone understand what they're doing, when they're doing it, etc. So once again, it's a thought provoker. It also helps to be planned. So I would, if anything, really focus on that run sheet, especially if you haven't run a workshop before. Of course, if you're experienced, your preference might be just to run your workshop off an agenda. But for those who want to be a little bit better planned, then that run sheet's for you.
Well, that's it. It seems quite simple, but yet it's so key when it comes to workshops about some of the things that we've talked about. The planning, ensuring that you know the logistics and what you need, checking out the room beforehand so that you can see what it's like, so that you can not walk in blind and have to deal with any sort of issues that are there. It's not great to have the first 5 or 10 minutes of your presentation used up by people who are trying to connect things, etc., because you haven't booked the room beforehand. Certainly when it comes to facilitating the session, it's all about your own self-confidence and about being objective. So enforcing your opinion onto other people as a facilitator is a big, big no-no. And when it comes to follow-up, allow yourself some time. You're going to need it to document the output so you can get it out in a timely manner. And always remember, your time's valuable, your participants' time is valuable, your key stakeholders' time is valuable. So ensure that you don't waste people's time. So be prepared, enjoy the session, and be sure to follow up.
Thank you for your time. The only way to learn is to do. So please get experience, use a lot of the information I provided today, provide me with any feedback. If you just jump across to energyequation.com.au, there will be other skill sessions available there as well. In any way that I can help you, I would love to. So please come and visit, sign up for my newsletter, or join us on Facebook, or connect with me on LinkedIn.